All right, so this is the last section we're doing of chapter 3, and it's all about absolute value, equations, and inequalities. Okay, so before I even get into anything, I just want to describe again what an absolute value is. So, the absolute value of any number is just the distance that it is to 0. So, the absolute value of 3 is 3 because it's 3 units from 0. The absolute value of -3 is also 3 because it's 3 units from 0. So the absolute value of something is always a positive number, and that's going to be something that we're going to have to remember going into this, okay? So the absolute value of 3 and the absolute value of -3 both equal the same thing, 3. So that's also going to be something important to remember. So as we're going through this lesson today, what's really important is that in order to attempt to solve the absolute value expressions and equations, you have to get the absolute value alone on one side first, just as you would get the variable alone. Now in this case it is the variable, so that's going to be a little bit easier, but once we get into this you might have more going on inside the absolute value signs, and that's okay. You just need to get everything on the outside of the absolute value signs to the other side before you take the absolute value steps that we're going to get our solution. So here we go. So it says, what are the solutions of the absolute value of x plus 2 equals 3? And then it wants us to graph those solutions, okay? So just like I said, we have to get this absolute value alone. So the first step is to move this 2. We're going to use it using our inverse operations. We're subtracting 2 to both sides. So we get that the absolute value of x is 3 minus 2, which is 1. Okay? So just as I said before, there are 2 values of x that will give you 1. I'm going to split this into 2. That means that x could equal positive 1, because if I plug in 1 here, the absolute value of 1 is 1. But also, x could be negative 1. Negative 1 is 1 unit away from 0. So the absolute value of both of these numbers both give me 1. So these are my solutions, okay? And it's an or. So 1 or negative 1 could be your solutions, okay? When you graph this, you see that it's equal to either of these. So all you do is you have a closed circle at negative 1 and at 1, okay? Any questions on that, please record it. It's really important. I need you to do the same thing down here. Now, actually what I need you to do is change this 1 to a 5. Okay, so you have n, the absolute value of n, minus 5 equals negative 2. And it wants you to graph those solutions. Okay? So, next up here wants us to figure out what the solutions are for 3 times the absolute value of 2x plus 9 plus 12 equals 10. And we're going to see what happens. So as you can see up here, we see this key word, but we're not going there yet. So what I want to do is act as if I don't care what's inside of these absolute value signs, meaning we need to get this 3 to the other side and we need to get this 12 to the other side. The 12 is furthest away from my absolute value, so I'm going to subtract 12 from both sides. I get 3 times the absolute value of 2x plus 9 equals negative 2. Now, in order to get this 3 to the other side, I know that 3 is being multiplied to this absolute value, so I need to divide by 3, meaning I get 2x plus 9 equals negative 2/3. Now, earlier in this section, we talked about how the absolute value of something can never be negative. Now, we see right here that our equation is telling us that it is. What that means is that there's no solution. There's no number that we can plug in to an absolute value sign to get a negative number out of, right? Because absolute value is talking about distance, and distance is always positive. So whenever you see this negative on the right-hand side, once your absolute value sign is alone, no solution, okay? Do this next one by yourselves. you really only need to do one step to figure out your answer, okay? All right, so next up, we're talking about inequalities now. So it's very similar to equations when you need to get your absolute value sign alone. So in this case, we see that the absolute value of 8x, the absolute value of 8x is greater than or equal to 24. So just as the first question we did, we split it to be 1 and to be -1, the same thing is going to happen here. So whenever we have absolute values, it always splits into either two equations or two inequalities. So in this case, we rewrite the same exact one. So 8x is going to be greater than 24, or we have 8x is less than or equal to -24. So whenever you rewrite inequalities, you write one as the same, and you write the other one with your sign flipped and your result being negative, okay? So it's going to be very important to remember how to rewrite these inequalities, okay? So now we just solve like normal. So we divide by 8 on both sides. We divide by 8 on both sides. So we get that x is greater than or equal to 3. Or we divide by 8 over here. We divide by 8 over here. X is less than or equal to -3. So if we graph both of these inequalities, we get a closed circle at 3 and everything greater than it. And then we get a closed circle at -3 and everything greater than that. And that is our solution, okay? I would love you to do the same thing here. Don't let everything on the inside confuse you. Your two equations, or your two inequalities, are going to be 2x plus 4 is greater than 5, or 2x plus 4 is less than or equal to -5. You're going to solve both inequalities and graph what it gives you, okay? Remember that it's an or statement. So last up, we have a word problem. So again, word problems are difficult for many students, including myself. So it's going to be really important to try to really read this problem and understand what we have going on. So a company makes a box of crackers that should weigh 213 grams, okay? A quality control inspector randomly selects boxes to weigh. Any box that varies from the weight by more than 5 grams is sent back. What is the range of allowable weights for a box of crackers? So let's define our variable, okay? So let's define our variable as W, which is going to be the actual weight of a box of crackers. Okay, so we know that the weight minus 213, never mind, hold on a second. We know that the difference of the actual weight and what the weight should be no more than 5 grams, right? So we want to do our weight and we want to take away the 213 and find the absolute value. So the absolute value in this situation accounts for a weight that might be less than 213 pounds, right? Or it could account for a weight that is more than 213 pounds. Once you take that absolute value, you'll be able to see the difference of your actual weight and the weight that it should be in the positives, okay? So right here, our absolute value is alone, so meaning I can split this into 2. So I have W minus 213 is less than or equal to 5, or W minus 213 is greater than or equal to -5, because this is what I do when I split my absolute value inequalities. I'm going to add 213 to both sides. They cancel. On this side, I'm left with W is less than or equal to 218. Okay? And on this side, I'm going to add my 213. I'm going to add my 213. And I get that W has to be greater than or equal to 208. So, what this situation says is that W, the actual weight, has to be between 208 and 218 in order for the box not to be thrown away, right? Because 218 and 208 are both within 5 grams of the weight that it's supposed to be. So the way that you can write this is that W has to be between, the weight has to be between 208 and 218 grams, okay? So in this situation, it's going to be a range, which means that it's an and inequality, okay? So your W has to be less than or equal to 218, and your W has to be greater than or equal to 208, and it can be any of those numbers in between. So this was a difficult problem. Please come with questions again. We're going to go over more word problems because they are definitely confusing. All right, guys, thanks a lot. Have a great night.